So I've cut pretty close to 100 pairs of boots and shoes apart over the last year and a half, and so I feel pretty confident in my ability to judge a pair of boots, especially a used pair of boots that I don't know anything about. So I thought I would make a kind of an expert's guide to judging a pair of used boots or thrifted boots, so that if you've got a little bit of a thrifting problem like I do, you won't waste as much money and you'll find the higher quality stuff and be more happy with your horrible addiction. So over the last week or so, I scoured pretty much all the shops and the thrift stores and vintage stores throughout the Salt Lake Valley and picked out these 10 boots or so of some good, some bad, and some ugly, so that we've got a variety to show you, a bunch of different examples and a few different things here and there so this video is as informative as possible. And we're also gonna talk about some brands you might want to avoid. And this video is sponsored by Karma. It's an app and Chrome extension that uses clever tech to ensure that you never miss a price drop or a coupon code, because if you're thrifting boots, you're probably gonna want to find discounts online. They're always expanding their capabilities, and their new name, Karma, it represents the good karma they're putting forth by helping you shop smart. They used to be called Shop Tagger, but changed their name. We have it installed on all the computers in the shop because anytime we're preparing a video, we always check Karma before we purchase something, because we end up saving a little bit of money here and there by just finding those coupon codes and those discounts, because why leave money on the table when you can just install that little app? And really all you have to do is just go on your computer, click the link in the description, download that button onto your Chrome browser, whatever you're using. Now, every time that you go to your favorite website, all you have to do is click that little side button, it'll open up and it'll check for discount codes. And the really cool thing is you can have it send you updates and new discount codes and notifications for certain things that you're looking for or you're waiting for the price to drop. And you can earn cash via PayPal when you shop from select retail partners. Now more than ever, it's important to get max value. So just take a second and click the link in the description. It just takes a few minutes to download and set up. It's gonna save you some money, and it helps me out by helping out these sponsors because they sponsor the video. It's a good one, it's an easy sponsorship. Just check them out, it's in the description. Thanks. And then before we even begin, why would you even consider buying a used pair of boots? A lot of people are turned off by that idea. A lot of times you can find some really good boots for 10 bucks that you might be spending 200 bucks, 300 bucks on to buy the brand new equivalent. And you can find some really cool boots. Like these are some vintage whites that are probably like 30 years old that are really cool. And some people, they don't like the environmental impact of brand new boots. And on that note of environmental impact, I know what you're thinking. We're not cutting any of these in half. The really nice ones and some of the more rare stuff we're gonna actually restore on the channel, and the rest of them that we don't necessarily want to do anything with, we're gonna be donating to the dumpster in the back. Just kidding, we're not gonna do that. We'll donate them to some like local homeless shelter, or redonate them to the DI or whatever we end up doing. Or we'll use them as bait for the guy that stole my trailer at the back of the shop. So now we got that kind of preface out of the way, let's start going through this thing. And I think the way that we're gonna structure this video to make it as consumable as possible, rather than go through all these and point things out, we're gonna break it down into 5 parts of the boot that you're gonna be looking at and do some pros and cons, some do's and don'ts for each part of that. So let's get it started with the outsole. So one of the easiest ways to tell the quality of an outsole is it a Vibram outsole, or Vibram if you're fancy. Like these Danners. So these Danners, you see that big yellow Vibram sign, these whites, big yellow Vibram sign, and there was one, oh, the Rockies, big yellow Vibram sign. Vibram is kind of the industry standard for a high quality outsole. Is it the only good outsole out there? No, but a lot of brands use them, and they're a little bit more expensive than the stuff that brands make by themselves. And it's just a good indicator of a quality boot, because if they're willing to spend the money on making their boots with a Vibram outsole, usually they're already paying a little bit more for quality leather and everything else that goes along with it. And there's other outsole manufacturers that are just as good. You know, there's like Cat's Paws, Day Night, there's but you're gonna be surprised at how many Vibram outsoles are out there in the wild, and it's a good simple indicator of quality. And another thing you want to look for is tread depth, because you know this White's boot, yeah, it's a Vibram outsole, but we are like razor thin on the heel cap here, or the top lift. So you know, this is a Vibram outsole, but it's pretty worn out, and spoiler alert, the next video is gonna be a restoration of this, where we're gonna put a new top lift on, and I'll show you how to do it at home if you happen to find a boot like this, where this part is good and your top lift is bad. So that's kind of the good things to look for. Some of the bad things to look for when it comes to outsoles, a lot of times if a brand is is kind of a clothing brand or a lifestyle brand. They don't specialize in boots. A lot of times they're gonna have their own outsoles or their own branded outsoles, and it's because they're a cheaper brand or a cheaper quality, and they've had them made in some factory, and instead of bringing in Vibram or some of these other better quality outsoles, they just slap their name on the cheap ones that the factories are making, like these Lucky brands and these Banana Republics and whatever these no-name lady boots are. But that doesn't necessarily mean that if a company makes a boot and they have their own name on the outsole, that it's a bad outsole. For instance, these LL Bean boots that we got for like $5. The nice thing about LL Bean in particular is if you find a pair of these for $5 and the outsole's worn out but the upper leather is fine, you can send these back in and I'll put how much a resole job from LL Bean costs. Some other examples is like Red Wing. They're more of a vertically integrated business, and they are a boot specific brand, and they have their own outsoles. So I trust Red Wing's outsoles. It's just some of these other smaller fashion brands that I don't trust. Another thing I try to stay away from is foam outsoles or TPU/PU outsoles, like in Blundstones. And I want to talk about Blundstones, but it's gonna clog up this video. So we're gonna talk about Blundstones and the two things you have to look out for when buying used Blundstones at the end of the video, just to keep this video concise as much as I can. And that leads us to the next point to look for, which is the construction and the resoleability. So let's start with the good again. So there's basically 3 general types of boot constructions. There's more, but for the most part you see 3. There's Goodyear welted boots, there's stitched down boots, and there's cemented boots. So what is a Goodyear welted boot? A Goodyear welted boot, or how do you identify it? Around at least the vamp of the boot, which is this part of the boot, you're gonna see a little strip of leather that has stitching on it, and that little strip of leather is the welt. The welt is basically the strip of leather that connects the upper of the boot to the outsole of the boot. Okay, why do I like a Goodyear welted boot? It's the classic way of making boots. A lot of the high-end boots and shoes are Goodyear welted. They're easily resoleable and they last a long time. So its sister construction is the stitched down construction. A stitched down construction is basically the same thing, but instead of having an extra piece of leather that wraps around the boot, they take the upper of the boot, and instead of tucking it under and sewing it to the welt, they flange it out and stitch that to the outsole. So it's a little more simple construction. A lot of people don't like it. There's some pros and cons associated with it, but either one of those I like, you know, and maybe I'll make a video in the future comparing the two and kind of my opinions on it. And the third style of building a boot is cemented, like Blundstones and like these are RJ Colts. And cemented constructions is exactly what it sounds like. They just glue with contact cement the upper to the outsole. There's a lot of really good cemented boots out there, but the problem with it is you only have glue holding the boot together, unlike a Goodyear welted and a stitched down boot where you've got stitching and glue holding them together. So when it comes to used boots, a lot of times I'll stay away from cemented boots just for the simple fact that I don't know what the history of the boot is, how long they've been left in the sun and the heat. I don't know how long it's gonna take to delaminate and fall apart. So a lot of times I'd stay away from cemented boots unless all these other things that we're talking about are checked off the list, and that's the last thing, and I'm willing to take a risk on it. And then onto the bad. We kind of already talked about some of the negative aspects of a cemented boot, but one thing that is really tricky and boot makers are really sneaky with is a lot of times you'll find a pair of boots that has a Goodyear welt stitch around the outside. You can see that it's leather, it looks good, but the problem is a lot of brands will fake a Goodyear welt stitch. So this brand, or this pair of Banana Republics, this has the leather welt, it has the real stitching. Best way to tell if it's a real Goodyear welted boot or just a fake Goodyear welted boot, you can kind of pull the upper of the boot away from the sole, not ripping the boot apart, but just enough that you're looking for a little bit of stitching in here. And if you look closely on this one, if I pull it back enough, you can see there's no stitching connecting it and it's just glued. Same with this lady's boot. I'm pulling that apart and all I see is a glue seam right there. Versus a Goodyear welted boot, I pull apart these Iron Rangers and you can see just a little bit of stitch. Not the welt stitch, but there's a stitch holding the upper to the welt. And You don't want to tear apart the boots at the thrift store or the vintage store, but it's worth just double checking that there's actually stitching going on there and it's not a fake welt stitch. And speaking of stitching, that brings us to the third point, which is the upper stitching. And this one's pretty straightforward. It's pretty short, but it is something that's really important because you might find a pair of boots that's the leather's good, the construction's good, the outsole's good, but if you've got some stitch lines that are really worn out, that boot's gonna fail before anything else is gonna fail and you might end up wasting your money. Basically, all these boots look pretty good except for these super worn out Thorogoods. If you look closely at these Thorogoods, some of the key points around the counter and around the toe, that thread, it's still there, but it's pretty worn out and it's only a matter of time before that fails. So just pay attention to it. Then to the fourth point to look for, which is the leather, and to me, one of the more important aspects. And this one can be really tricky because fake leather can be really convincing. I've even been fooled a few times in some videos. But what I do when I'm trying to identify if it's real leather or fake leather is I look at the cross section, because pretty much any boot you're looking at will have some exposed raw edges. And if you look really closely, you should see some of those little leathery fibers kind of poking out. And what I do sometimes if I'm not sure is I'll just take my fingernail and scratch it and see if I can pop some of those fibers up. And if you see those leathery fibers, it's probably leather. You have to be careful though, because some of that fake leather has a felt backing, and those felt fibers can look similar to leather. So we'll add some images of the difference between felt fibers and leather fibers. And if you're still not sure, there's a couple other ways to tell. You can just look the boot up and see if the manufacturer says if it's leather. You can also sometimes find on the boot, it'll say a full leather upper or leather components, or there's some signifiers sometimes on the sole or on the tongue. And maybe the easiest way to tell is, I think most boot companies have to declare what their boot is made out of. Sometimes it's on a sticker, sometimes it's on a tag, but I'll put a little chart up here, a decoding chart of what each symbol means. But basically you're just looking on the inside of the boot and looking for those symbols. I'll put it up here. It's just gonna be easier to show you rather than explain it all. But if it looks like that leather symbol and it's pointing to the outside of the boot, it's probably leather. And then to the bad, stay away from fake leather, because the problem is, like in these cheap lady boots, that fake leather coating, that plastic coating or polyurethane coating on top eventually starts flaking off. That's another thing you can look for when you're identifying if it's real leather or not. Real leather's not really gonna flake off like that. And I don't like fake leather because it doesn't breathe like real leather. It's not as durable as leather. It doesn't patina like leather. And for those of you that are environmentally conscious, to me, I would rather put leather back into the ground that's gonna biodegrade rather than plastic. Now, a few ways that you can also identify fake leather is look at the cross section. If it looks like it's felt, it's probably felt. If it looks like there's foam inside of there, it's probably foam. And the last thing I wanna cover about leather in this video is, it's kind of in between the good and the bad. Just be aware of the condition of the leather when it comes to scratches and gouges, and more importantly, the dryness of the leather, because sometimes you get some of these 50-year-old boots like these Iron Rangers, they haven't been worn, they haven't been conditioned in several decades, and so that leather's completely dry. And if you took these out and started wearing them without conditioning them, they're gonna wear out pretty quickly and start splitting and start flaking off. And really all you have to do to revitalize these and bring some life back into them is just add some conditioners. There's two conditioners I really like that don't really change the color of the leather, maybe slightly, especially if it's really dry. I like Chamberlain's and Bic 4. I'll put the links in the description to the ones that I buy. But if you're not concerned about the leather changing colors, or you really want to prioritize the longevity of the leather, get some mink oil, slather these babies up with a few coats, and it'll really saturate into the leather and really bring that suppleness back and lubricate those fibers, because leather is just a bunch of fibers intertwined, and if it's really dry, every time you bend it, it's just gonna crack and break them. But if they're lubricated with some oil, they're gonna just move more fluidly, and it's gonna be more comfortable, and they're gonna last longer. But conditioning boots is always scary because you don't know what color they're gonna end up. So just find a spot on the boot, try a little area that you don't mind if it is discolored, make sure you're okay with the color, and condition your boots. Just kidding, there's one more thing that I want to talk about leather. So sorry if this video is 20 minutes long. I think it's important information. So when you see a boot, sometimes you're gonna look at a boot and you're like, oh, this must be a quality boot. We've got some good materials. We've got a leather heel stack on the heel, like these RJ Colts and these Lucky brands, but it is leather. but it's not leather all the way through. It's just a thin leather veneer that wraps around the outside of the heel. And on the inside, it's just a cheap rubber heel, and it's really hard to tell sometimes. Like when I first picked up these Lucky brands, that's a pretty convincing leather heel stack. And one of the best ways to tell if it's real leather or it's not real leather, like if you compare these whites Packer boots to this Lucky brand boot, you can see on these whites boots that leather is compressed in different ways. It's kind of splitting, it's open, and there's fibers coming off of it, and it's not as perfect looking as these Lucky brand boots. If you look at these RJ Colt boots, right at the corners you can see it starting to pill up. And maybe don't do this at the thrift store or the vintage store, but you can kind of scratch at it and pull it back. Just don't do it. But if they're your own, you can do it. Now to the fifth and final aspect before we talk about what to look for in Blundstone so you don't waste your money, is the fit, feel, and look. It sounds obvious, but it's the one that catches me the most, because I'll look at a pair of boots and I'm like, these check all the boxes, except for they don't quite fit me right, or they're lumpy under my foot, or the guy that wore them before, like in these Packer boots. Whatever old cowboy was wearing these before me had a severe outward pronation, probably from sitting on a saddle, assuming he's an old cowboy. And when I put these on, it feels like my ankles are rolling. And so I wouldn't want to wear these boots around all day, every day, because it would really, after a few miles, you start kinking your knees funny, you start to get some knee pain, some hip pain, and it can be really bad for you. So just make sure it feels good underneath your feet, unless you're wanting to resole them a little bit like we're doing with these. So now let's talk about Blundstones and what to avoid, because this is one that gets tricky. You might find a pair of Blundstones and you're like, these are perfect, they're Blundstones, they're my size, everything's great. But there's two huge issues you need to watch out for with used Blundstones. The first one is just the general structure of these boots. There's a harder TPU, basically a rubber outsole, but then there's lots and lots of foam all through the midsole. And the problem is, if you start wearing through the outsole, like on these pair of Blundstones, you hit that foam layer and it absorbs water, it wears really quickly, it starts chunking off, and they don't have much life left in them. If they're really cheap and you're just wanting something to kick around the backyard with, it's probably okay, but just watch out for it. And the second thing is probably the most important thing to look out for on Blundstones, and be really careful when you're buying Blundstones online that it doesn't have this. A little thing called hydrolysis happens to Blundstones, where if you don't use your Blundstones, all the moisture in the air gets stuck in the little air bubbles in the foam of the midsole and the outsole, and it slowly kind of melts and makes the outsole crumble and makes them really, really sticky. And so you get to a point where once that hydrolysis has taken place, you can literally, I could rip this apart and just take chunks off of it because it's so broken up. So just be careful with Blundstones. They're a really risky one when it comes to used boots. Now I want to quickly go over the do's and don'ts of each of those 5 things so that you have a short, concise 30-second clip and you can take a screenshot of these lists. So do get a Vibram outsole or some of the higher quality outsoles. Don't get the cheap clothing brand outsoles. Do get a Goodyear welted or a stitched down construction boot. Don't get a cemented construction, or at least be really careful and pay close attention to the cemented constructions. Do get a boot that has good stitching, that's solid stitching all through the upper. Don't get a boot that has really worn out stitching, especially in some of the vital areas. Do get a leather upper that's higher quality, that's not cracked, that's not split. Don't get a fake leather, you're gonna regret it. And finally, do get a pair of boots that you're gonna wear, that's gonna fit you right, that doesn't have any lumps, that doesn't have any pronation, that's not worn out. And don't get a pair of boots that's not fitting you right, that you're never gonna wear, because you're gonna fall in the same trap that I fall into every time I go to a thrift store. So that wraps it up. Is it a perfect guide? No, I could talk about this for hours and give you a really in-depth thing, but this is a pretty solid list to go out to the thrift stores and at least get you right 9 times out of 10. You're still gonna miss some, but it's all the important stuff that's the most vital parts of the boot that are gonna give you the longevity and the quality that you're looking for. If there's something I missed, just add it to the comment section, because the comment section, fortunately on my channel, is pretty civil and everyone's really nice and helpful. So the comment section will be a really good resource for this video for the stuff that I didn't have time to cover or forgot about. So thank you guys so much. I'm on the mend from Corona. Apparently I got Corona. I think the last time I had coronavirus was a false positive because I wasn't really sick, and this time I was out for 3 weeks. So we're back to full steam. Actually, that's a lie. I'm going bear hunting next week. but we're almost back to full steam ahead. We got some cool stuff coming down in the future that I'm really excited for. And yeah, thank you guys so much for everything you do. If you have not subscribed, just do me a favor and click the subscribe button. That's the #1 thing you could do. It's free and it makes all the difference in the world. So thank you guys so much. And I didn't realize Toaster was maybe blocking all the boots. Sorry about that.